Why, good morning, Mayor Sower. What a pleasant surprise.
Oh, thank you. Nice to see you, John
It's a
Cliff.
pleasure
Haven't
indeed.
seen you in some time.
That's true.
You're looking good.
Well, thank you. You're looking fine yourself.
Well, it's nice to be here. You know, this is the bicentennial year for Kentucky, and we felt like it would be important to come over and see the site of Isaac Shelby's home, because Isaac Shelby was the first governor of Kentucky elected 200 years ago.
Well, you have come to the right place. And who might this be?
This I should have introduced her first, shouldn't I?
Oh, but I noticed her.
Well, this is my cohort, and her name is Carolyn Schaefer.
Carolyn, it's nice
And
meeting you.
she's worked with me now for about a year, and she is just one of the finest historians that you'll find any place.
Well, welcome to Traveler's Rest.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I feel very honored to be here, I might say.
All right. Well, unfortunately, this is not the original house that the governor had built. The foundation, however, is original. The original house was accidentally burned by some folks living here that were going to smoke wasps out of the eave, and they smoked the whole family out of the house ultimately.
No, what a shame.
But the foundation is the original foundation. So if you would like, I'll show you around the side where the cornerstones are, where Isaac had engraved his name and date and so forth when they built it.
Let's
So
do that.
come on around the side.
Okay, I'd love to see that.
John, I believe that you said that there was an original stone here when the house was built that shows it was built in 1786. Is that correct?
That is correct. You'll notice the lower stone has Isaac Shelby's name engraved on it and the date of August the 2nd, 1786. And that was when the original house was built. The stone on the top part, Isaac Shelby Tevis, was a descendant of the original Mr. Shelby, who smoked the wasps and the house and burned it to the ground and subsequently built the new house on top of it, and that was completed in 1906.
1906 was when it was originally, the new house was originally
That
completed.
is correct.
Now, the foundation, I think you told me
That is still the original
foundation of the old stone house.
That is correct.
Which is supposed to be originally the oldest stone house west of the Alleghenies. Is that right?
Well, I don't think they've ever quite decided that. There are several people arguing about it, but it certainly was one of the originals.
One of the originals, yes.
Yes.
I see. Well, I think that's just great, and I think it's awful nice for you to be here with us today. And also, I think that you told me that the original slave quarters is still standing.
That is correct. The original building that was the slave quarters when this was a plantation is on the other side of the house. So if you'd like to come with me, we'll go take a look at it.
Let's go take a look. Good. I think that's great.
Well, this is the original building that was the slave quarters, and although there was not a date that we have been able to find, we assume that it was built right around 1800.
I see.
And basically it's just two very large rooms, and the slaves, it was kind of like a dormitory environment, and that's it.
But it was an original building when Shelby was here. Isaac Shelby was here.
Yes, he built that building.
Yeah, he built that building.
Correct.
Isn't that
correct.
interesting? You know, another thing that I have read about the original stone house, that it was built by our old friend Thomas Stonehammer Metcalf. Thomas Stonehammer Metcalf. He was the one that built the original building, you know, stone house, and he actually also built the stone foundation for the old governor's mansion in Frankfort in 1797.
Right.
And I thought that was interesting. But not only that,
Quite a craftsman.
yes, he was. He also became the 10th governor of Kentucky. Isn't that?
I did not realize that was the same person.
The same person that built the original stone building here for Isaac Shelby. And, you know, I have a feeling that after he built this stone house for Isaac Shelby, probably Shelby had a lot to do with him coming over to Frankfort to help lay the stone foundation for the old governor's mansion in Frankfort.
Well, I'm sure he did, because there were not that many stone craftsmen available in the area at that time.
Now, didn't you also tell me that originally there were about 1,400 acres
Yes, that is
in the
correct.
original deed to Isaac
Well,
Shelby?
actually, the original deed, to my understanding, was much larger than that.
Is that so?
But when we became aware of the property, which was about 12 years ago, it was 1,400 acres.
1,400.
It was my understanding, and back in the beginning, this was still part of the state of Virginia, and they were giving out land grants for people that would settle in the area.
I see.
And Shelby's property at that time, from what I have understood, was several thousand acres, and it was subsequently divided up. He built a couple other homes in this area for his children, and just got subdivided along the way, and ended up at 1,400 acres. When we came on board, there were 1,400 acres.
Now, how long have you owned this?
We've been here a little over 10 years, like
about 10 years.
11 years, that's correct.
And you fly all over the country?
Yes, I'm a pilot, and unfortunately, I'm going a great deal more than people think.
Well, I want you to be sure and give us a tip then. You know these horses pretty well. I want you to give me a tip now on the Preakness. You probably
do not
didn't
want this on television. Because if I gave you a tip, he would break his leg coming out of the starting gate.
Well, let's go around in the front of the house again. What do you say?
Okay,
All
sounds
right?
good.
Well, John, this certainly has been a most unusual occasion for us. You know, we really didn't realize that you were going to be our host. We thought we were going to have to sneak over here, you know, and take a few shots. But really and truly, we want to thank you. You've been most kind and gracious to us. Even took us a little tour inside, and we saw a picture of the original stone house on the inside.
Right.
So I want to take this opportunity to thank you so much for allowing us to come over here.
Well, I certainly want to thank you all for coming out and doing this. It's a great time for our state, and this is a wonderful place to have a documentary, and I have enjoyed having you as my guest, and look forward to you coming back again.
Thank you. Whenever you get to Frank
place.
Fitz, drop in and see us.
I will indeed.
Right.
Have a pleasant
Thank you
day.
now.
It was nice meeting you.
Enjoyed it.
Bye.
Thanks. It's a beautiful place, isn't it, Mayor
Oh, my
Sower?
goodness.
Just beautiful.
Just absolutely gorgeous.
It
you know,
is.
I didn't realize we were going to have this much fun.
Oh, we've been lucky, I tell you.
We
Nice
have.
family to show us around and give us a lot of
Wasn't
data,
that-
a lot of history.
That man was so nice, wasn't he?
Very nice,
John
very
Cliff.
helpful.
Oh, he
yes.
was.
Can you imagine living here at Travelers Rest, the home of Isaac Shelby? That's quite an honor, isn't
it though? You know, there's a lot of history. You know, if a lot of these trees could talk, no telling.
Oh, I know. Tell us who's been here in years
Yeah,
past.
that's right. There
That
many
would be
notables
nice.
came by here, you know, in those
Right.
days to talk to Isaac Shelby.
And they say he was such a friendly person
Yes,
that
he was.
everyone was always welcomed
That's
here.
right. And he knew so many people,
Right.
you know, because he was a family man, but yet he loved to have other people come and visit him, you know.
Mhm. That's how it got its name, too, Travelers Rest,
Travelers
because
Rest.
travelers were always welcomed.
Carolyn, I think it's important maybe that now we give a little background on the Isaac Shelby family. You know, in 1732, Evan Shelby came over from Wales, and he settled in America, and he actually came to a little place called Hagerstown, Maryland. He was a royalist in the days of Cromwell, so he had a big land grant. So that's another reason that he settled in Hagerstown, Maryland. He had a wife by the name of Catherine Davies, and they had 7 children. The oldest one was named Evans Jr. And Evans Jr. in 1745, Evans Jr. married Letitia Cox, and they had 7 children. The oldest one, of course, was James, and the 4th one was Isaac Shelby, the one we're going to talk about today, of course, who was the governor of Kentucky many, 200 years ago. Isaac Shelby was born near Hagerstown, Maryland, on December the 11th, 1750. The family actually, about 1773, they moved from Hagerstown, Maryland, and they went down into North Carolina, and they finally settled near Bristol, Tennessee. Actually, it was sort of on the border between Virginia and North Carolina. And in 1773, why, they stopped at a little place and they built their home. It was called Saplin's Grove. Again, I say that it was in Virginia at the moment because actually all of this area was part of Virginia, you know. But in 1774, why, there was a lot of Indians around this area. And so in order to try to quell some of the attacks that the Indians made on the settlers, why, they called on Isaac Shelby and his father Evan Shelby, and they were very active in what was called Lord Dunsmore's War. And Isaac Shelby actually was a lieutenant in his father's regiment at that time. And
that was the war where the Shawnee Indians were up on the north bank of the Ohio, right?
That's correct. What they were trying to do, there was a chief of the Shawnees by the name of Chief Cornstalk. And they thought they had a treaty made between Cornstalk and the settlers, whereby the Indians would be north of the Ohio River and the settlers would remain south of the Ohio River. But in the big powwow that they have, Chief Cornstalk was voted down by the Indians, and they said, no, we're going to attack all those white devils. So they had what was called Lord Dunsmore's War, and it was the only time that actually Isaac Shelby fought on the side of the British.
Oh, okay. He would fight many wars, but that would be the only time that he would fight for the British.
That is absolutely correct. So there was only one really important engagement during Lord Dunsmore's War, and that was at Mount Pleasant up in Ohio. And actually, Governor Shelby, of course, he was a lieutenant at that time, he had a lot to do with the victory that they had there. Because during the battle, it was very furious because the Indians were hiding behind trees and so forth, and they didn't know exactly where they were. But Isaac Shelby took his regiment and made a flanking move so that he got almost behind the Indians, and then his regiment began a terrific fire because they were getting to behind the trees where the Indians were. So they defeated the Indians at that time, and then Cornstalk had to come to the table, and the treaty was made at that time.
I see.
But actually, about that same time, you know, Isaac Shelby was quite active, and he was made a major in the militia by none other than Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson gave him the duty as a surveyor, because he had also been a surveyor for his father in earlier days. So Thomas Jefferson gave him the duty to extend the boundary line between Virginia and North Carolina. So in doing so, Isaac extended the line properly, but it so happened that Sapling Grove, the home of Evans, his father, was then in North Carolina.
Oh, goodness.
So the governor of North Carolina, a fellow by the name of Caswell, he immediately made Isaac Shelby a colonel in the North Carolina militia.
All of this without even moving, huh?
That's right. He was just doing his duty to extend the line,
Right.
but then there his home was in another state, you know, so to speak. But also, you know, one of the first places that were settled in Kentucky was, of course, Boonesboro, and then, of course, also Harrisburg was one of the first. In fact, Harrisburg, I guess, probably had one of the first courts was there at Harrisburg. But our good friend Isaac Shelby, in 1775, he was at Boonesboro. And he finally decided, well, he would explore the land all around Boonesboro. Well, the funny thing, Carolyn, happened. He started chasing a buffalo. And he chased that buffalo for miles and miles. And finally he got to within about 10 miles of Danville, and there the buffalo got away from him. But it was a land that was a beautiful plateau with a lot of trees around, and also he could, in the distance, he could see the knobs on the mountains, and right away he says, this is the most beautiful spot that I've ever seen in my life, and he called the place Knobs Lick. So what he did, he fixed his tent right on the ground on the plateau there. He spent the night, and then the next morning he got up, he cut down some trees with his axe, and he made a structure which was called a tomahawk structure. Improvement. Tomahawk improvement is the correct word. You're exactly right. And that meant that tomahawk improvement meant that he had the deed for the land grant, so to speak, for 1,400 acres of land that had been given to him for his services to Thomas Jefferson and the colonies, of course, at that time.
Now, was that the maximum allowed under Virginia law?
That was the maximum that was allowed under Virginia law. So he did. This is the spot.
And this is where the buffalo came. This is where the buffalo brought him.
And the tent probably was right over there.
Right
Carol.
where we're seated. It is beautiful.
Isn't it pretty,
Most
though?
beautiful place,
oh,
yes.
It's pretty.
Yes.
There's no question about that. Of course, the next thing that I guess probably happened to Isaac Shelby was the fact that the Revolutionary War was coming on about that time.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, he was in Kentucky, and he was quite active about 1780, while there was a gentleman by the name of General Patrick Ferguson. And he was with the British, of course. And by this time, you know, we were trying to get our independence from Great Britain. Mm-hmm. And this General Ferguson, he had almost destroyed Charleston, South Carolina, and he was making his way up to North Carolina when Isaac Shelby and Evans and a lot of his family received word that they needed help. They needed help. Bring some men and horses and so forth. Let's see if we can defeat Ferguson. Mm-hmm. So they ran, they had their horses and so forth, and they pursued Ferguson for many miles. But they finally trapped him at the Battle of Kings Mountain. Well, that's quite a story. But actually, Shelby was in charge of the regiment on the right. And there was another gentleman that had the regiments on the left. Again, during the battle, why, Isaac Shelby gave word as they approached Kings Mountain and they approached Ferguson's men. Isaac Shelby gave the word. He says, don't shoot anybody until you're sure that they'll fall.
Right.
You know. So what he did, why, he told the man, he said, I want you to be very quiet, not say anything. We want to get as close to them as we possibly can before we fire. Mm-hmm. Well, they were so successful that they surprised a great number of the pickets that were, you know, out in front of Ferguson, that they were able to capture so many of these men without firing a shot. Mm. And Ferguson didn't realize that they were so close until they were within several hundred yards of his army. So, again, Isaac Shelby made that flanking move, and he got around in behind Ferguson's army. And by that time, as he made his flanking move, then the other regiment on the other side made their move, so that Ferguson's army at Kings Mountain was almost completely surrounded. Finally, good old Governor Shelby gave the word to fire. Well, it was quite a battle. And some of the Ferguson's men said, oh, I don't know whether we can take care of all these men or not. This looks like quite a battle. I don't know whether we can succeed or not. And you know what Ferguson said? He said, "We're not going to give in to any of these bandits."
But I tell you, those mountain men knew how to fight, didn't they?
And they were pretty good shots, too. As a matter of fact, they finally got close enough to Ferguson that they fired on Ferguson, and he fell from his horse. He had a shot in his head. Both arms were broken, and they said that his body and clothing was just riddled with bullets, and he had a tremendous, beautiful white horse. The horse was shot. He fell off of the horse, of course, and down the mountain tumbled the horse. So it was quite a big victory, and he gained a lot of fame from the victory and his actions, Isaac Shelby's actions, at the Battle of Kings Mountain. And a little bit later, some of the people said, "Oh, there goes old Kings Mountain."
They called him that then, right. Well, now, you know, many historians say that that battle was a turning point of the Revolutionary War, that's when the Americans actually started winning.
Yes, that is correct. It was one of the turning points. Of course, the Battle of New Orleans was another big victory for us under General Jackson, but this was sort of a turning point because we stopped Ferguson from going up and joining with Cornwallis, and it was quite a deciding victory.
You know, Mayor Sower, another thing about that battle that made it difficult was that so many friends and relatives were fighting against one another.
That's right.
You know, when you're firing and you realize it's a neighbor or a relative, I'm sure that was very, very hard.
That's true, because there were so many people that were loyal. They wanted to be loyal to Great Britain. And there were other people, of course, that wanted the independence. So, again, it was brother against brother in many instances, just like the Civil War.
Right, and they didn't have uniforms. I read where some wore twigs in their hat to determine that they were loyalists, and some had pieces of paper in their hats. So that would make it very hard when you're fighting.
Yes, well, of course, one reason that they were able to see Ferguson was because Ferguson wore a big jacket over his uniform that had all kind of different stripes and crosses in it, you know. So they knew beforehand, that's the man that we want to be sure and get, because once we get him, then the battle probably would be over. And it is a fact, you know, Ferguson, before he was actually shot, he went around and some of his men were putting up the flag of truce. And he told them to put the flag of truce down. But some of them wouldn't do it, you know, and he got furious about that. But as soon as he was shot, that just about took care of that battle.
That took care of that.
I thought also that we should talk a little bit about the fact that in July of 1782, why, Isaac received the grim news of the death of his old friend Nathaniel Hart. You know, Nathaniel Hart also was the daughter of Susanna Hart. We're going to talk about that in a minute, you know. But Nathaniel Hart was a friend of his. You know, they knew each other when both were sort of active, a little bit at least, a little active, in the Transylvania Company. That had a lot to do with obtaining, surveying and obtaining land, you know, many, many years ago. But he received the word in 1782 that his old friend, Nathaniel Hart, was on his way to Boonesboro, and he was attacked by the Indians and thrown from his horse, and he was scalped. They said of just maybe 100 yards from the Boonesboro fort, and probably under the gaze of his daughter Susanna Hart. Wouldn't it be awful? That would be just absolutely awful for something like that to happen.
So is that when Isaac met Susanna for the first time?
He met Susanna Hart, and you know, almost right away he started courting Susanna Hart. She was a beautiful, beautiful girl. And of course, during the long hot summer and the cold winter of 1782, you know, I've talked about the fact that's when Nathaniel Hart was killed. But the next summer, see, in April 19th in 1783, there was rejoicing.
A big wedding.
Rejoicing, yes, at Boonesboro, because on that date, why, Isaac Shelby married the beautiful Susanna Hart. And, you know, that night, there were a lot of people at the wedding, of course. And that night, finally, when things sort of quieted down, why, they went upstairs, of course, to bed. And all of a sudden, Isaac Shelby smelled smoke.
Oh, no.
Yeah, on his wedding night. So he rushed downstairs, and part of the downstairs was on fire. So immediately there were still a lot of revelers around, some of them sleeping, but that woke them up.
Right.
So what they did, they formed a bucket brigade, you know, to the well, because, you know, there wasn't such thing as a fire, no fire department, but they did have a bucket brigade going as they did in the olden days, and they finally got the fire out.
Well, that was a night to remember, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And he was, what, 32 years old when he got married?
He was 32 and she was 19, and I must tell you this, it has become an historical fact that Susanna Hart, she had the just tremendous ability that she wove and spun the flax to make her own wedding gown. And she had such skill, Carolyn, that she was able to draw the width through her wedding ring.
Oh, no.
Isn't that something that she was able to do?
Very
that?
talented.
Isaac's mother, of course, had passed away in 1777, about 8 years before the marriage, of course. But also, right after the marriage, why, Isaac Shelby, he wrote to his favorite brother, James, to come and pay him a visit. Well, James thought about it, and finally decided to come, but it was maybe a couple of years later. Unfortunately, he was attacked by the Indians, and he was killed, and that was his favorite brother. So Isaac took it pretty hard that his favorite brother had been attacked by the Indians back there in those days. But also, of course, his mother, as I have said, passed away in 1777. And all of a sudden, why, the father, Isaac's father, he started courting.
Oh, having parties.
And they did. They had some huge parties on the plantation at Saplin's Grove.
How did the family feel about that?
Carolyn, the boys didn't think too much of it. As a matter of fact, all of the sons, you know, of Evans were furious at the fact. They felt like that the gentleman, the old man, so to speak, he was having some improper and maybe immoral parties there. So they objected very strongly to this romance. They felt like that maybe she was a gold digger.
What was her name? Isabella Elliot?
Her name was Isabella Elliot. And finally he said that he would marry her, but she said, before I'll marry you, you must deed 1/3 of your estate to me.
Sounds dangerous.
Well, in 1787, why, actually, Evan Shelby, he finally married the girl anyway. And they actually named their first child James. Of course, they had 2 others, but you reckon that maybe they named him James because
after his son who
died and was killed and so forth and so on.
Right.
Probably so. Maybe that's probably what happened. But anyway, you know, Isaac tried to, he was a family man, and he tried to smooth things out with his other brothers. And he was a man that was a center of stability, so to speak, and he handled the correspondence when the other brothers would write to him and want to know where the other brothers were and how they were getting along, of course.
Right.
And he executed the wills, kept the correspondence, and he actually, what he did, he actually tried really
Make peace in the family.
make peace in the family.
Mhm.
That's exactly what he did.
After that second marriage, I think Isaac showed that he was willing to accept that marriage by naming his son after his father at that point. So I think that helped maybe the whole family accept the marriage a little better, don't you?
Yes, I think so. Actually, it was in 1787 that Isaac, they had their third child, and it was real nice that they named him Isaac. I think. I'm like you. I think that probably helped the situation a little bit better.
Right.
Maybe
right.
with the families, but who knows? But about this same time, the Western settlers became a little bit disgruntled. They had a problem with Virginia. Of course, I guess one of the reasons was the distance between Boonesboro and Sapling Grove and Danville and Harrisburg was a long way to Williamsburg, Virginia, and then, of course, later at Richmond. So they resented the fact that Virginia would not send them sufficient aid to fight the Indians. And of course, Virginia, on their point, was distance too. It was a long way. Plus the fact the settlers refused to give any money or any assistance towards the expense of sending troops to help fight the Indians. So it was, as I've said before, they became quite upset. So what they did, finally on December the 27th, 1784, why they finally decided to have a meeting in Danville to discuss what really should be done. One of the things that came out of that meeting there, one of the first things, was the fact that they were able to come together with a plan to defend themselves against the Indians. And then, of course, the other thing, they resolved at that time that they would try to break away from Virginia and become a separate state. So you might say that that was one of the first conventions. In Danville, of course, there were 10 conventions leading up to Kentucky becoming a state. And of course, Isaac Shelby, he was there.
He was always there when it happened.
And the first chairman of the convention was a fellow by the name of Samuel McDowell.
Oh, another famous name.
That's right, and he was the father of Ephraim McDowell.
Okay.
Then the clerk of all of the conventions was a fellow by the name of Thomas Todd. And you know, his house is right there in Frankfort on the corner of Washington and Wapping Street. And I won't go into that story. I think we've given that story before. But
I think we have.
yes, but Thomas Todd was the clerk.
And it all ties in together, doesn't it?
All ties in together once again. That's right. So they did, at that time, start negotiations with Virginia to become a state. And, of course, it was not until 1792 that we did become a state. Of course, George Washington was very strongly in favor of Kentucky becoming a state, and actually in February of 1791, that's when the act was passed by Congress for Kentucky to become a state. But, you know, Kentucky, we dilly-dallied around. We wanted really to become the first state to join the Union after the first 13 original colonies. But Vermont beat us. They became the 14th state, but we became the 15th state. I better back up just a little and tell you that, of course, after when the Constitutional Convention finally convened, and I won't go into a lot of the stories about what went on up to those conventions, because we've covered that before, you know. But I will say this, that in May, actually it was May the 17th of 1792, the electors, you know, at that time, the people out in the state were to elect the people that were going to be their representatives.
Uh-huh.
But they elected electors, and they did meet in Lexington, Kentucky on, as I've said, May the 17th, 1792, and they elected Isaac Shelby governor.
Oh, that was mostly due to his impressive military history, wasn't it?
That was the main, I think, reason. They felt like that here's a man that has done great service to the colonies, to Kentucky, and he's the man to lead us because the Indians were still around,
Right.
you know. But actually, Kentucky became a state on June the 1st, 1792, 200 years ago. But he rode on his horseback from Travelers Rest right here. He rode to Danville first, and they had a big reception for him at Danville. And then, and he spent the night there. Then the next day, why, he rode on his horse all the way over to Lexington. And they had a big parade, of course, and a fellow by the name of John Bradford, he was chairman of the Board of Trustees. He gave the word of welcome to him, and he had a military escort down into town. But he actually wasn't sworn in, well, he was sworn in, too, on that day, but they didn't have the first meeting, so to speak. They met just for a very few minutes, you might say, on the first day of June to elect a few officers.
He had
But
kind of hesitated before accepting the
he
governorship,
did.
hadn't he?
I'm
He
glad
kinda
you
thought
brought
on
that in. I'm glad you brought that in, Carolyn, because he did. He hesitated because he felt like that maybe he wasn't qualified to become governor of Kentucky. But after waiting 3 or 4 days, why, he decided he would, and he did accept it back there on May the 17th, but he was sworn in, of course, on June the 1st. And then on June the 4th is really the first day that they had a session there in Lexington on Main Street. And actually, he made a talk to both houses, and he became the first governor of Kentucky 200 years ago.
Oh, at age 41, right?
41 years old. That's exactly right.
Quite a young man to
He
be
was.
to be
He
governor.
was quite a young man at that time. You know, also, I might just inject this, that later in December of 1792, why, the state seal was approved. There was a lot of controversy in later years as to who actually made up and approved the seal. Some people said, oh, we think it's Daniel Boone. But in doing a lot of research, historians have come up with the fact that James Wilkinson, who founded Frankfort, was the one that came up for the seal of Kentucky. And of course, it shows two men embracing each other, which is great. Great. United we stand, divided we fall.
Right.
But also, back in June, just briefly, I'll tell you this again, but I'm repeating some of it, but Frankfort was selected the capital of Kentucky. They first appointed a commissioners, 5 commissioners, and they looked over the many sites. There were about 7 sites that were given serious consideration, but Frankfort's bid was quite impressive because of the $3,000 that was guaranteed, the 8 public lots, and about 1,590 purchases of stone, and all the wood and lumber and sawmills that you need. So, since Kentucky was in dire straits financially, why, the commission reported in December of 1792, about the same time that they approved the seal, that Frankfort was the proper place to be the capital of Kentucky. Now, Isaac Shelby didn't take any part in the selection of Frankfort, but he did concur with the commission's choice. So, you know, actually, the choice stirred up some of the people in Kentucky, mainly in Lexington and Louisville. Lexington wanted it. They felt that they should have it. They were the largest city in the state at that time. Who do you think was the second largest?
Let's see. That's tough. I don't know.
Well, Frankfort, Kentucky was the
Was it the
second
second largest at that
largest
time?
at that time. Louisville was about 5th. you know.
Well, my goodness, things
Yeah,
have changed.
things have
really.
changed.
Yeah.
But they did. They went ahead, and Frankfurt, as you know, has become the capital of the state, and we'll not go into a lot of that because we've already talked about that in some of the other parts that we've done.
But Isaac was a very good governor. He had Shelby County named after him, and which used to be a part of Jefferson County.
Right.
And it seemed like he was a very successful governor and very honest and trustworthy.
Right.
And I think the people appreciated that.
Well, he was a stable man, you know. You wouldn't say maybe that he was just an outstanding man, but he had good advisors, not only on the local level, but he knew a lot of people that were smart and intelligent on the national level that were his advisors. So yes, he made a very good governor, and especially his honesty and integrity grew during those 4 years, 1792 to 1796.
Now, while they were building the Capitol in Frankfurt, they also had to put guards there. I found that to be a very interesting story.
Yes, they did. They had to post guards around the Capitol because they were Indians still around, not major attacks, but, you know, the last major one was out there at the Forks of Elkhorn that we've talked about before. But they did. I thought that was interesting, too. I'm glad you brought that up, Carol.
Well, we drive by these buildings, and just to think that while it was being built, the workmen had to be guarded against the Indians, I just think it gives you a different attitude now when you drive by after hearing that story.
Well, I guess you have to give a lot of credit to the workmen, don't you?
Right.
When Evans, his father, died, why Isaac was named executor of the estate, of course, and he was involved in this responsibility almost till the end of his life. And actually, in the settlement is this note that actually was that he had made. He says, "I have no further demands against Isabella Elliott on account of the said estate, nor has she any further claim against said estate for dower or otherwise." And also he said that her husband that she had married, his name was Alexander Drumgoole. That's an unusual name, isn't it?
Very unusual.
But he said he is not to set foot ever on Sapling Grove Plantation the rest of his life. Of course, actually, in settling the state, Isaac Shelby finally sold Sapling Grove and all that estate to a fellow by the name of James King back about 1814. Isaac stepped down from the governorship in June of the 7th, 1796 with a wish that he'd never get back into politics. He wanted to go home to Travelers Rest, right where we are, and he wanted to take up farming.
Well, I can't say that I blame him. I think if I was ever here, I wouldn't want to leave this beautiful place either.
You know, I think this sort of brings us to the end of our first part. I think we have enough that we're going to have 3 parts, Carolyn. I thought that we would go from here, we'd go up to Arcadia, the home of Isaac Shelby Jr.
Okay.
And that will be the second part.
Okay, I'm ready and looking forward to it.
I am too. Let's
Okay,
go.
Let's go.